inkább a járványügyi helyzet különböző kihívásaira, például a hibrid munkavégzés, ugye home office és helyben végzett munka kihívásairól lesz szó. És annyiban mindenképpen összefonódik ez a két téma, hogy itt is igencsak nagy jelentőséggel bír a megfelelő kommunikáció. És ezt nem győzzük eleget hangsúlyozni, hogy a megfelelő kommunikáció az alapja horizontálisan, vertikálisan egyaránt mind a megfelelő digitalizációnak, a munkavégzéseknek, ennek a hibrid munkavégzésnek is, mert miről van szó? A járvány maga gyökeresen átalakította a munkavállalói élményt, a HR-nek nagyon agilis módon kellett reagálnia erre, és ezt jól is tette, és a szervezetek többségében, és főleg a sikeres szervezetekben motorja volt ezeknek a változásoknak, hogy hogyan lehet átalakítani a működést hatékonyan, hogyan lehet erre a hibrid munkavállalásra és a munkavégzésre fölkészülni, milyen készségre van szükség ezeknek a változásoknak a beépítésére, hogyan néz ki a hibrid munkaerőstratégia kialakítása a gyakorlatban. Hát ezeket a kérdéseket fogja megválaszolni Michael Martin, a Kincentric HR és tehetség tanácsadás üzletágának globális vezetője, és nagyon fontos, hogy tudjátok, hogy utána kérdezhettek is tőle. Michael, the stage is yours. Thank you.
Hi everyone, Michael Martin here with Kincentric. Greetings from New York City. I look after our global HR and talent advisory consulting solutions, and will be sharing with you today a discussion on the future of the employee experience. And I'm looking forward to many questions and answers at the end of my session. So, as I'm sure all of you are seeing in the market, there is a tremendous amount every day of articles and papers and points of view and research being published on the future of work, now that we're still living through this pandemic. And companies, our clients, are taking a variety of approaches to think through the active pandemic right now, and also sort of thinking through in the future, what does this mean for us as a company, as a culture, as leaders, and what type of experience do we want to provide our colleagues going forward as we go through this pandemic? And what does it look like on the other side? And what we're finding from our clients and in our research is that, organizations have actually done a very good job at providing a good experience for their employees so far during the pandemic. In our recent research this past summer, 81% of employees who participated in our study indicated that their organizations were doing a very good job at making them feel cared for, providing a good well-being and experience in connection with their leadership teams. Really, really positive results from an engagement perspective. The number one driver of well-being in this sort of positive engagement was connection with leaders in organizations. So leaders have really stepped up during this pandemic and have connected with their employees, and the engagement results at 81% are showing that. We're finding too a change in the workforce and the extent to which employees and leaders and managers in all kinds of organizations are more likely now to talk about stress and talk about personal experiences outside of the workplace at work, which is providing a new opportunity for leaders and supervisors to connect with their employees. And 71% of employees in our study feel confident that their organizations will support them as they face personal challenges going forward as we emerge from this pandemic, hopefully, in the coming months. So really positive indicators from our research on how strong organizations have responded to their employees during this pandemic. It's really encouraging as a lifetime HR consultant to see such positive results during this really, really difficult time for all of us. Something else that's been quite interesting in the research, and I'm sure many of you are seeing this in your own organizations, the experience that difference between how many have experienced this pandemic and work and balancing everything The difference between how men and women are experiencing this pandemic is showing in our research. And there's a gap in terms of manageable stress and the impact that this pandemic is having on colleagues. There's a gender gap there. So I think we're starting to see clients start to think about what they can do for their various segments in the organization. And it may not be a one-size-fits-all approach or solution. And it's really important that our client organizations think about gender gaps and how the experience may be different being at work during this pandemic, virtual, hybrid, in the office, in an essential role, what that experience might be like in terms of the difference between men and women. So there's a lot happening. The good news, though, is that organizations have very much responded in a positive way. HR colleagues around the world are telling us that they have seen heroic efforts from HR teams, from the CHRO on down, in terms of responding to the organization and employee needs during this pandemic. And it's all been very impressive and exhausting. A lot of folks are talking to us now about how just exhaustion is starting to set in, especially within the HR teams globally with our clients. This is a lot on top of mind for HR leaders as they start to think about continuing to manage through this pandemic. And then more importantly, what's on the other side? How are we going to emerge as an organization? What is our workforce going to look like? Where are we going to have colleagues working? And at least in the US press, and I read global publications, it seems as though corporations are taking very different approaches to answering the question, what is the future employee experience going to be like at my organization? We have clients that say you can work from home to their workforce forever and ever. You can continue to be virtual for as long as you'd like, and it's up to you as an individual to make that choice. Other clients are talking to us saying, no, we've done a study and we've looked at our jobs and we've made the determination that not everybody can be virtual. And we want people to start to come back to the office when it's safe to do so. So on this slide, we're showing some of our research that look at sort of where do we suspect in our crystal balls looking forward, work will happen. And no surprise, in the sort of one of the spikes of the pandemic in midsummer, 83% of our respondents said that they were working virtually. It was probably a little bit higher. But looking forward and thinking about once we emerge from this pandemic, where will the workforce be working? Only 46% of those organizations thought that the most of their workers would be virtual. So this really is in line with what we're seeing in the press now. Even this morning, I saw some articles here in the US on the hybrid nature of the workforce going forward. And it really is going to be very much a time for everyone in HR to think about the future and to think about your own organization. And as we say in consulting, the segments in your organization and how this experience needs to apply to them based on the role that they're in and where you need them to be working. Whether it's virtual, whether it's in the office, we think that most organizations will have some type of hybrid model going forward. And what does that mean? As though the job of HR isn't hard enough, managing the entire life cycle of the employee experience, from candidate experience all the way through to alumni. What are the implications of having to think through as an HR professional, maintaining the positive engagement that we've seen during the pandemic so far and the heroic efforts that HR and leaders have displayed in making sure that their companies can continue to operate and that their employees feel safe and supported while showing up to work. Thinking about this as we continue through this pandemic and also starting to think about what happens on the other side of the pandemic. Now that our workforce has changed and we've become a hybrid work environment, whereas in the past maybe we were more virtual or more in the office, it can be quite daunting to think about that. And one way to start to think about that is to think about your segments in the organization, because the employee experience for certain types of roles and jobs may be very different depending on what the job is across the variety of roles in your organization. So a one-size-fits-all approach is probably not going to be sufficient to come up with the employee experience of the future in a hybrid work environment. It's just become more complex. The good news, though, is that the data suggests there's a lot of work to do on HR, but some of the priority areas that are emerging as our clients start to think about a hybrid workforce in the future are thinking through onboarding. How do we onboard colleagues when we have a mix of people and where they're working around the globe, and some are virtual, some are hybrid, and some are in the office? So thinking through and re-engineering your onboarding experience is something that clients are saying is becoming more important as they think about the future employee experience. The most important thing to think through is, from a talent strategy and from a change management perspective as we emerge from this pandemic hopefully soon, is interactions with senior leaders and their employees. It's the number one driver during this pandemic of positive engagement. We've seen some really good, strong connections happening between leaders and their colleagues around the world and all of our clients across industry. The challenge for HR is to think about how do we create programs that enable leaders to sustain this really positive connection that they've had with their workforce. And that just becomes a little bit more complicated as as we emerge from this pandemic, where we do work and the nature of work and how we interact as employees and colleagues in the company is going to be very different, because where we're working is going to be different. So there's work to do there. But it is the number one driver looking forward based on our research for what HR is going to be focusing on. How do we ensure that that connection between leaders and their teams continues to stay very strong and positive in the hybrid work environment? Training and approaches to training and on-the-job development will be different, especially if where you do your job changes and you're not used to actually having a hybrid work arrangement where you're in the office 2 days and working from home for 3 or whatever the mix is. The performance management cycle and feedback is going to be critical and is very much prioritized in terms of what needs to be rethought through and redesigned, probably for a hybrid workforce and an experience that's positive for leaders and for their colleagues. Inclusion, belonging, and psychological safety, thinking through the impacts of this pandemic and the impacts that a hybrid workforce and a hybrid work arrangement is going to have on the employee experience, and how that may impact your various segments, and various, the impact on men, the impact on women, and the diversity of your organizations is going to be critical, as will well-being, emotional health. Our study shows that colleagues are going to be more comfortable talking about their personal health and safety and well-being with their supervisors and colleagues and leaders in their work. I suspect personally that HR can play a role in helping leaders understand how to manage through and support colleagues who are coming to work with stress, with personal issues at home because of this pandemic that they've not had to deal with before. So there's a tremendous opportunity for HR to continue to do heroic things for their internal clients and organizations across the world, because we've seen such tremendous positive things happening around the world globally during this pandemic. The challenge is how to sustain that while keeping the lights on, as we say. And the good news and the silver lining is, as I've said, we've seen some tremendous things happen with all of our clients around the globe, not just from HR colleagues, but also from leaders. And what we've seen is that COVID-19 has been an accelerant for many things in a very positive way. Caring, learning, purpose, and agility. Clients are responding and thinking about their purpose more than they ever have before, because it's been a way to connect leaders with their colleagues and workers around the globe. Our results have shown that organizations have done a terrific job with this. And I think one of the silver linings of this pandemic from an experience perspective is that it's been an accelerant, because it's forced leaders to think about staying connected with their colleagues and workers more than they ever have in the past. Rehumanizing engagement and inclusion and well-being in the employee experience. People are coming to work with probably more of their whole selves and what they're experiencing at home, because they're working from home. They can't leave it at home because they're at home while they're working on virtual calls like this. So I think that the COVID-19 has been an accelerant for just sort of taking reintroducing the humanistic elements of HR into practices and programs in in organizations worldwide, which is a really positive impact on the employee experience. The challenge is going to be how do we sustain that. Shifting to act, listen, adjust approaches for continuous dialogue. The concept of only listening or engaging or pulsing your employees once a year to understand whether they are from an engagement perspective and connectedness to their organization perspective is just not a model that's probably going to continue, and we're really seeing a lot of organizations adjust and have much more frequency with the way that they listen to their colleagues worldwide with surveys and other sort of listening tools. Actively listen in an agile way, come back with solutions and adjust programs and processes where they need to. I think that this is going to continue much more going forward, and organizations are going to take a much more agile approach to continuous listening and dialogue. Virtual work, flexibility, work-life balance, I think is going to be a top-of-mind topic for HR leaders and leaders in the business for a couple of years to come. We've learned a lot, but as the pandemic starts to hopefully level off and we all start to emerge from this, hopefully with a vaccine sometime soon, I think that we've learned a lot collectively, and we're going to see some really interesting, cool programs coming that are focused on work-life balance, flexibility, and virtual hybrid in the office work. COVID's been an absolute accelerant for leveraging technology like we are today and meeting virtually. And the design of work, I think, is going to be continue to be on top of mind for HR leaders to help their business clients understand how work can be done differently. And we no longer need to fly people into conferences or rooms in person like we did in the past. Big opportunity for HR to sort of help their clients internally think through how to make this happen and sustain this connectivity that we've had that's been virtual. Continuing to support leaders and compassionate leadership and connection with their employees has been accelerated through this COVID experience. And then finally, listening to others. And as HR professionals, I've been in HR for my entire career, which is now many, many years. I've not seen in my history such connectedness that HR professionals have had with each other outside of their organizations, and really learning from the community of HR professionals like we're doing today, and understanding best practices and experimentations on what are you doing, how is it working, let me try that in my organization. So I think that the pandemic's been an accelerant from that perspective too. And all of this has been for the benefit of organizations providing a good, positive experience for their employees within their company. Our research, when we talked about and asked HR professionals to think about their own priorities for HR, only 42% of the respondents, despite all this positive effort, found themselves to be ready for capabilities needed going forward. I suspect that HR professionals tend to be a little bit harder on themselves than they should be, but I think there's work to do here to really pause and think about how are we going to sustain a positive employee experience as we go forward. And you can see the data here. There's a lot of investments that are being thought through in terms of infrastructure, technology, thinking a different approach to an HR operating model, and capability building in HR to continue to support their organization. Client case study to share a couple of parting thoughts with you, and I'm happy to have a healthy Q&A. A client came to us a couple of months ago and said, you know, we're doing a very good job, as most HR functions are, with managing through this pandemic, but Michael, we need your help to think about what happens on the other side. You know, is this an opportunity now to actually formalize a more agile people strategy and an approach to managing more virtually? And we helped our client by leveraging two of our methodologies. One is our Agile People Strategy Framework, and another is change management. And I think the lesson learned here is that despite the chaos that this pandemic has presented us, it is important to think about what's been working well over the years as HR professionals, and having a thoughtful, methodical approach to defining a people strategy and marrying that with change management, I think, is a solution for HR professionals as they think through the employee experience of the future. And I think you may have lost my video and technical issues. Sorry, if I hope you heard and saw most of my materials. I was having a very exciting conversation with myself, and it's difficult not being able to see people on the other side of my presentation. So thank you, Judit, for stepping in and helping me. So I think now we're in the Q&A part of the conversation. I'd be happy to hear your questions. So
while the audience is also entering questions in the chat, a question that came to me is, so you talked about rehumanizing the engagement approach and also the approach of HR, but also what we see, and you also mentioned the acceleration in terms of digitization. So how do you see it all post-COVID? So once this is all behind us, how would it change the HR approach? How would it change the digitalization? Will it stay with us? Will it be continued, accelerated? How do you see that?
Yeah, I suspect that it will stay with us. I think that folks have learned quite a bit collectively on how to work with one another, how to stay connected. We've been in each other's home for months now. So I think from a humanistic perspective, I think it's probably not been an event in my lifetime that's connected colleagues within an organization like this. On a personal level, I think that's something that's going to be very hard to lose. So I think it will stay with us. I think leveraging technology and sort of virtual tools to work virtually with colleagues will continue. I do think that a lot of us are missing in-person connections with people and colleagues. So I do think that that will start to come back. I hope so, sooner than later. But I don't think everything we've learned from this pandemic, using technology, staying connected, the importance of bringing your whole self to work and connecting with supervisors and leaders and colleagues on a more personal level, I don't think we're going to lose that. I think if we do, it will take a long time before people forget the powerful, positive connections we can make during this. And all of that has an impact on how organizations are going to think about the employee experience and people as being maybe less of a human resource, human capital, and more of sort of, yes, we're all human capital for an organization, but we're also humans and people, and that connection, I think, will stay. And candidly, the organizations that figure out how to sustain that connection, I suspect, will be back to business sooner than those that don't.
And you mentioned agile HR strategy or people strategy. We hear about it a lot recently. What do you think should be the first step if an organization is or being the first person in HR in the organization, the decision maker? So what shall be the first step, or what should be the first few questions that they should think over to start working on that path?
Well, I think with any good people strategy or talent strategy, the place to always start is to think about what is our business strategy for the next 1 to 3 years, as best as we understand. Where are we heading as a business? What are our strategic objectives? What's our purpose as an organization? What's our mission, vision, all the traditional questions? What are our specific initiatives that are going to help us achieve our business objectives? And then from there, think about the implications on your people. Have a playbook. And when we say have a talent strategy, a lot of organizations are still struggling to actually have a common definition of what that even means internally. So I think there's a couple of places to start. What's our business strategy? What's the implication on our people? When we say we want a people strategy, what do we mean? What does that template look like? What are the table of contents? And then think through sort of a traditional people strategy framework. What are our segments? Every segment is important in an organization, but what are our critical segments to achieve our business strategy? And then go through a methodical process to understand all the aspects that are required to make sure that all those segments of workers in your company are set up to be successful to meet that business strategy. It requires a lot of strategic thinking in HR, probably especially the HR business partner. So there might need to be some rethinking on capabilities for people in that role so they can really sit at the table with the business unit president and think through and have this conversation. What's our strategy? What's the impact on our culture and our people? What's required to be successful for the segments within our people that are most important to help us achieve our business strategy?
Yeah, and you mentioned HR partners, and you also mentioned in the presentation the HR operating model. And so what we often see is a need to be a shift to happen in the HR business partner role, but it's just so rare to see that shift. On the other hand, as you just said, they have a key role in activating the people strategy in an organization. So, what are your thoughts on really elevating the HR business partner role to a strategic level?
Yeah, a lot of thoughts on that. That could be another entire session, which would be a lot of fun to have that discussion. We're seeing some really great work happen with our clients that are focusing on the role of business partner, pausing a beat, and when you can find the time to actually redefine and make sure everyone's on the same page with the role of the business partner. What are they supposed to do? What are they not supposed to do? Is the business partner role a strategic talent strategist, individual contributor who sits at the table and may even report to a business unit leader? Or are they a generalist who's responsible for everything? So clarifying the role is the first step. Another step is to think about the capabilities required, depending on what the focus of the role is. My point of view is that it should be more leaning towards a talent strategist and less of a generalist to be effective. And really, given everything we've gone through and all that's ahead of us, HR needs to have capacity also in these roles. So they're not doing everything. They have time to think about defining a people strategy. And the path to capacity for a business partner is to think about the infrastructure and the automation and the tools and really leveraging and building up shared services in HR so that the day-to-day work is done by the experts taking care of colleagues on a day-to-day basis and simply giving HR business partners the capacity to spend time thinking through all the strategic implications of a business strategy on your people. That's really hard to do when you have an hour a week that's not booked with day-to-day stuff with your employees. It's pretty simple, really. Capabilities and capacities and role definition. And having a playbook as to how we actually define people strategy in my company. Those are some of the ingredients I think that will make it easier for HR professionals to sort of help their business leaders think through the implications of all of this on employee experience and on their colleagues. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Capacity and capability, I think it's just two of the crucial points whenever it comes to HR and HR business partner role. Definitely. So I'm not seeing more questions in the chat. So I think with that, thank you for having us, HRFEST, and have a wonderful rest of the session here on the productivity session.
Thank you.